This is The Baseline, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA.
Welcome, everybody. You are tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Summertime is here, and you know what that means. That means more NBA basketball to be evaluated and looked at. And an exciting time, obviously, after the NBA draft. All eyes now are going to be fixated and focused on free agency, which will be happening very, very shortly, like literally around the corner. And so while we're bringing in this mosh posh of players and talent and finding out where some of these marquee names might find different destinations to go to, this is going to be a critical and important time once again for the NBA offseason and discuss everything that's happening in the association. You know, I got to do it. My right-hand man, 50 grand NBA aficionado, Diamond contributor, writer for one of the illest websites, www.shawsports.net. Big Kahuna and PNC, my brother from another mother, Mr. Warren Shaw, repping out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Holla back at me, Mr. Shaw. What you been doing these days, man?
Man, I've been chilling, man. I appreciate the intro as always. Salute to all the fans and listeners of NBA Baseline, and thank you for tuning in. As you said, man, the summer is hot. Summer is here.
Man, Shaw, you have not been chilling. You have been on your grizzy, my brother. You got to make sure this is also election year 2016. We have to be right with the politics. Got to tell the people the truth. Got to give them the truth, brother. You've been grinding. Just admit it. Just let them know. Don't be ashamed about it. Just let them know you've been grinding.
We try to keep it humble on the low, but we be hustling as always. And, a lot of great stuff has been happening, I think, for our brand and the Shaw Sports brand individually as we continue to push through for the summer and get everybody the information and that they need and that they want from us out here on the Baseline. But, again, we have a great show on tap, and I can't wait to jump into these topics. It's free agency time. We got a great, amazing guest coming on just in a little while. And as always, I'll let you do the introductions as you always do, my dude.
I appreciate that, man. Better than Brexit. You know how we roll here with the Baseline NBA podcast. This week, we have a phenomenal guest who'll be joining on in a few moments. He is the director of global scouting for the Charlotte Hornets. He's a part of three World Championship titles with the, my beloved Los Angeles Lakers. Clearly, I'm just joking about that. But no, he's definitely been a part of a great, great era of championship basketball with the Los Angeles Lakers. He is a phenomenal coach, a phenomenal scout. He has released an upcoming book, which we'll also get into in a little bit as well. It's our man, Adam Filippi. He'll be hopping on board with us to talk about this past the draft that just happened not too long ago, and also to talk a little bit about the phenomenon regarding the international game and how scouting now has become important when looking at the international talent that is crossing from Europe, from China, from across seas here to play in the NBA. And then also in the drop, we got to do it, man. We got to talk about NBA free agency. It is happening a lot sooner than you think. It's not just the rumors. It's also the possibilities, the endless possibilities. My man Shaw and I will go into the crux of some of the top-ranked free agents that we should be talking about and that you should be looking out for because they could possibly be heading to a favorite team near you. So we've got an excellent show lined up. Of course, we always appreciate everyone showing their love and support for the Baseline. Get at my man Shaw at Shaw Sports NBA or get at me at GameFace Lee. The show's Twitter handle is at NBA Baseline. And we always encourage you to hit the hashtag NBA Baseline or The Baseline. Let us know who you are, what you're about. Available on all the major platforms. Available on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, Player FM, Microsoft TuneIn. We're also available on Google Music. And my man Shaw is rolling deep, rolling hard on the Roku channel. So check out Shaw Sports. He is available on Roku, where the Baseline NBA podcast is uploaded, ready for you to listen to and enjoy. We encourage the mantra, download and discuss. And as always, once we put that plug in, we want to see you viraling it up on the Twitter handle, Twitter feeds, Facebook, and all of the major social media channels that the NBA Baseline is on. Once again, we appreciate you and yours. You know how we do, and you know how we like to set this off. It is time now for the breakdown.
Time to break it
down to the bone gristle.
Time now for the breakdown. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw of the Baseline NBA podcast. This week we have a really special guest on board with us here to help us kind of give a little bit more insight with reference to the post NBA draft, and also give us a feel of what the current trend is taking place now in the NBA globally. He has a really resounding resume. He's currently the director of global scouting for the Charlotte Hornets, and his name is Adam Filippi. Adam, thank you for joining us this week here on the Baseline NBA podcast.
Thank you, guys. Great to be here.
Adam, your resume pretty much speaks for itself. You've been scouting in the NBA since '99. You've been a part of 3 World Championships teams with the Los Angeles Lakers as director of international scouting, and you're also your focal point has also been that you are a shooting expert. You've released books which is shown and teaches in mastering the art of free throw shooting. And in your vast experience, especially when you see the landscape of the NBA, what has been the one thing that you have taken out, the caveat that you have seen from scouting and also from your tutorials? What is the one thing that you're taking for this generation that we have now seen as far as their desire to be champions in the NBA and their desire to be better basketball players?
Yeah, well, I say it all the time that I believe that a solid basketball organization is built on scouting and player development. I mean, you want to evaluate players the right way. You want to understand what you're getting. And a good scouting report is the blueprint to a good player development program. You know where a player needs to get better, and then eventually the coaches get on the court to do that. So that's kind of been my philosophy over the years, and kind of playing around with both of them, scouting and, skill development. I feel that I've improved myself because, when you observe players, you see certain things, and your instinct is, well, I love to work with that guy to make him improve. And, we see more and more from a player standpoint. I think that, we talk a lot about player development. We talk about philosophies in getting better, but not all players have the right strategy to get better. So I think the modern player, you look at the AAU, you look at high school basketball, players are playing more and more games, and there's less and less practice, at least individual practice. And I think that has become somewhat of a problem. There should be a better balance. I always hear kids and parents say, I'm looking for exposure. But if you're not a fundamentally sound player, guess what? You're getting exposed, but not in a positive way.
I like how you said that there, Adam. And, one of the things with your expertise being something on shooting, obviously the trend in the NBA is, the whole hack or whoever strategy and things like that. When you talk about the overall player development and these young guys not getting the development early on, how hard is it for you, as a person who teaches and helps people with their shooting, to work with somebody who struggles in that area at that stage of the career, already reaching the NBA?
Well, first of all, shooting is such a, it should be the most important fundamental of the game. It's the one skill that most players are willing to go work on. But at the same time, very few players are willing to admit that they have a flaw or something to adjust. It's like showing a sign of weakness, saying, yeah, I realize I need to improve my shooting technique, my free throws. No player wants to show that weakness. So, the first part of getting better is admitting to oneself that, hey, you know what? I could be better at this. If I'm a 60% free throw shooter, why can't I be a 70% foul shooter? So I think that's a big, big part of the problem, is admitting to oneself, that you need to get better. So from a coaching standpoint, it's also very, very hard to approach a player, especially at the pro level. Just think about, the average coach going up to a solid NBA player and say, hey, you know what? We need to change your shot or make some adjustments. The player automatically becomes defensive. With experience, coaches will go through that multiple times maybe, and they become discouraged in approaching a player to get better. So it's very hard to get on the same page, develop a strategy for improvement, and go and set progressive goals. I mean, everybody wants to, run before they learn how to walk. And it takes patience. It takes a lot of patience to readjust, to make some little improvements in one's shooting technique. And I think that is probably the reason why I wrote 2 books on shooting. Is I had to experiment a lot on myself, and I kind of retaught myself how to shoot more efficiently. And I think both my first book, Shoot Like the Pros, and my new book, Mastering the Art of Free Throw Shooting, both of them do give direction to both the coach that's wanting to improve his own players and to players of all levels, trying to perfect their own technique.
Adam Filippi joining us here on the Baseline NBA podcast. And Adam, actually to follow up on your point that you just made, because I'm very curious about this as well too, as it pertains to not just what we see here with the current scope of American-born players and the international players, but your ability to teach and to scout. How much of it has it easily been able to translate to the international players as compared to the American players? Because I know in most cases, especially when we talk about like the NBA draft, and we're talking about the lottery picks and the guys that are in the first round, clearly they have their circle, they have their camp. And to your point, the idea or the premise that there is a flaw to their game, that there is a weakness that they need to work upon, it almost seems like a difficult task for you to be able to translate getting these guys to kind of get outside of what seems to be comfortable for them, challenge themselves to be better at what they're doing or set those goals, as maybe it would be for, say, international players who their one desire, their one dream is to probably find themselves playing in the NBA, and they're willing to do whatever it takes to give themselves an opportunity, that one chance to either be drafted or to find themselves playing on a professional basketball team.
Well, the environments are definitely different. High school, let's say, to a youth program in Europe. I grew up kind of a little bit in the States, a little bit in Europe, because my dad is Italian and he lived there. And then I spent a lot of time even in my youth down there. When I was 15, 16 years old, I was already practicing almost like a professional player. So it was definitely different compared. Even though I could tell that I wouldn't say my work ethic was better, but I was used to being held accountable for some things. Now it's a little more wild in the United States. You say you got all these traveling teams. Your high school season is very, very brief, and you're changing teammates all so often. In Europe, it's a little more structured, but things have changed there too. Things have gone a little bit downhill because the economy, the good coaches are trying to coach at the senior level and no longer at the youth level. So I think that, and I say this all the time, a European player usually is a little more challenged athletically, maybe a step slow. It's going to be his fundamental skill set that's going to allow him to reach the NBA. If you look at all these players that have reached the NBA from Italy, Spain, Yugoslavia, whatever, most of them are terrific shooters. Most of them. You look at over the past, Bellinelli, Gibrisek, Turkoglu, Gallinari, most of the European players that have reached the NBA level were terrific shooters. I say that all the time when I go to a basketball camp in Europe, whatever it is. Your skill set's the most important thing, but most of all, the one skill that could allow you to eventually play in the NBA someday is definitely shooting. And we see that over and over. I'd say 90% of European players that reach the NBA are good shooters.
So I got a 2-part question for you with that too, because I have read recently that the European league's money is drying up, and that a lot of these guys, especially when you look to see what happened in this last year's draft, this draft that happened last week, a lot of international players were taken, and they don't want to be stashed. They want to come over right now because, like I said, maybe the culture or maybe the money isn't there like it used to be. But seeing the trend, would you say that we're going back towards that trend? Because I want to say it was the year after Bargnani got drafted or like that, then maybe some NBA teams kind of shied away from drafting so many European players, at least in the first round. Now this year, again, I think after the Porzingis thing, everyone's like, well, you know what? We need to go back out there and kind of tap that market. Do you see that trend going back in that direction right now?
I think this year was kind of a weak draft. It was not a great draft. So a lot of European players ended up being in the first round, but maybe in a regular draft, they probably would have been more second rounders. Because of the economy, because things aren't the same, you're going to see more and more your international prospects, from Ben Simmons to a couple other guys that are coming over now that I can't name. But there are more and more top-level prospects. Alex Len was another one who did that. Sabonis' son, another kid like that. They preferred to go to college in the United States. They felt that was the best road to reach the NBA, and not having any contract obligations, ridiculous buyouts to pay in order to get out and fulfill their dreams. So I think we will see the change in that. Is this good or bad? Well, let me tell you. And I'm one of my European bases in Bologna, Italy, which is a big basketball city, or at least was. Manu Ginobili was drafted, and then he played 3 more seasons in Italy. So basically, he came to San Antonio when he was 25 years old, and he had already established himself overseas when Europe was not that far from the NBA. Okay, now there's a big difference. But 10, 15 years ago, Europe, the top teams in Europe were so good, they were NBA caliber, rosters. And players like Ginobili, he was a player that really, he was in no hurry to come to the NBA. And there was a chance that he never would have, because what if one of those teams, had given him a 5-year, big time contract? He was not established at the NBA level yet, and he could have gone that route and stayed in Europe for a long time and never made it over to the NBA like, Oscar Schmidt, 30 years ago. So there was always a chance. I don't see that happening anymore. I see players being more impatient. They want to make it over to the NBA, like you said, because they want to secure, themselves economically. And, but at the same time, most of these players are not ready. They have not established themselves at the EuroLeague level to prove that they're ready to transition to an NBA rotation position.
So with that said, it kind of brings me to, keeping things over here domestically. Is the D-League structure now more attractive, obviously, for even the U.S. players who might not have been ready ordinarily, or those second rounders who are like, hey, they were going to run to overseas. And, I think the need for the U.S. players over there maybe not as great. Is the D-League structure now better set up? And then conversely, even with the TV deal, does the D-League kind of get more money in order to offer more players so that they can stay over here? And the same thing for the European players coming over. Is the D-League even more attractive to them coming up right now?
That is the key. The D-League has been great for a lot of players. We have countless players on NBA rosters that developed in the D-League. But it's very difficult for European players because the salary structure in the D-League until now has been very low. So put it this way, the best players that are not in the NBA, they're usually not in the D-League. They're in Europe because they're going to get money. So let's say a player has an offer for $350,000. He's going to take that job, although it limits his chances to get he's not going to get a call up for the NBA. That's why it kind of sucks for some players that are good enough to be in the league. They could get a call up if they were in the D League, but they're not in a position to refuse getting a good contract in Europe. But I think we're going to get closer to that day, like you said, where the D League is going to be able to offer better salaries. I'm just saying, if a player could make $100,000 in the D League and has a chance of getting called up versus going to Europe for 200, hey, he made this and stay in his own country, because at the end we're talking about, maybe an American player. It would make sense for him maybe to stay in the D League. I don't think we're there yet, but we could be getting closer.
Adam Filippi joining us here. He's the director of global scouting for the Charlotte Hornets, the Breakdown Baseline NBA podcast. And Adam, I was actually curious about this, and since we're still on the topic about what transpired just this past week with the NBA draft, obviously there's a unique skill set. I feel like there's this international boom flavor thing that happens. Like you see a boatload of players that are being selected in the draft, all with very similar skill sets. Maybe some 10 years ago, it was that these guys can shoot the basketball like there's no tomorrow, even though they may lack foot speed. And then not too long ago, impeccable passing from the big man is the flavor. What's the flavor?
Sure.
What's the flavor, so to speak? What's the flavor of the month now that you're seeing to be the trend to get the international players again ahead of the curve so that they still maintain the status quo? Because obviously we've seen the most international players drafted in the first round, but I also see that there's so many similarities because of the fact that this draft was, I guess, not to the highest of standards in previous drafts. So what should be the budding trend that you look for, or that should be expectations for international players to continually get ahead of the curve?
Yeah, I don't think the skill set is changing. I think the Europeans' ticket is always going to be, good fundamentals and most of all shooting. It's not that all the time, but I still think I wouldn't, go away from that. But the game has changed a little bit, and we see a lot more stretch fours, bigs that can open up the floor, or some versatility in the 4-3 position, like a Gallinari, something like that, or a Dirk Nowitzki. But still, that still comes down to shooting mostly, where you can stretch the floor. You look at a player like Bargnani, who did, some may say fail, but at what he did, he was very good before he started getting all these little injuries. But he was very good at that. I continue to see that being potentially the strength of a European player. Stretch fours, ability to open up the floor. I still see that. Although another thing is that something that we saw in this draft. We saw 3 centers getting picked in the first round. Well, actually, let me take that back. One was picked early second round, but Ante Zizic from Cibona is a center. Georgios Papagiannis is a center. Ivica Zubac is a Croatian kid who was drafted, I think, 32 by the Lakers. So we're talking about 3 pure centers, 7-footers, that have gone, pretty high in the draft, and you can see they're not ready to play right now, but they have huge potential. And you guys know it's not easy to find big guys, and these 3 are all 3 extremely, extremely skilled and a little more mature than your typical 19-year-old college kid or college freshman.
So I know you got to get out of here. The last one. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I'm good. I'm good.
Okay. So, real quickly though, as you talk about it, and great pronunciation on those names, Joe, because we were butchering those names on our draft recap the other day. But I wanted to ask you, with regards to kind of like even in free agency now. So how much of an impact, does your voice have, or, other people like you around the NBA when it comes to free agency? Because I think a lot of people think, okay, global scouting, and it's basically preparation for the draft. But there are some guys you can maybe pick up in free agency as that gets geared up too. How much of a voice do you have when it comes to those decisions?
Well, you're talking about European players playing in Europe right now for free agency, or in general?
Well, both, kind of in general, though. Yeah.
Well, I'll be honest with you. The one thing where I've been a little bit disappointed in, not anything I did wrong or the organization did wrong, really, but it's I would have loved in Charlotte to be able to bring a veteran player from Europe over to the team or over to the NBA, even the previous job I was at with the Lakers. Because some American players that maybe don't find a spot, they may go to Europe, they may get better, and then they're ready to come back. We saw that with Anthony Parker, who was a terrific European. He really struggled when he was drafted, played in Europe 5 or 6 years, established himself as a premier player. Then he came back and played in Cleveland, played in Orlando, I think, and he was a solid. He played in Toronto. He's a very, very solid player. So it took him some time. The NBA makes a huge mistake when they erase a guy just because he failed at the NBA level initially. Because we've seen a lot of players come back and do well. Even guys that weren't even drafted. There's some players that weren't even drafted, and they went to Europe and they blossomed. So I do think it's very important, and I would love to be able to get a player like that. The problem becomes that the ones that do establish themselves overseas, they begin to get huge money, okay? And when you start getting paid good money, and an NBA team is like, wow, we like that guy, but you're only willing to give them, let's say, the minimum, a pro player is going to be like, hey, I can't do that. So it becomes very, very difficult to be able to number one, convince a player or make him an offer without him having ever played an NBA game. So it's hard to go give a guy, maybe I'm just saying, $20 million over 3 years to a guy that's only played in Europe, was not drafted, or was drafted and didn't find his way onto an NBA roster. So there are huge risks involved, and it's not that easy because there are a few star players in Europe. Theodosic, De Colo, who played briefly with the San Antonio Spurs. There are 5 or 6 really, really good players that could be on an NBA roster, but it's hard to bring them over, guaranteeing them the security that they're already getting in Europe.
Adam, one last question, and it's actually pertaining to your tenure and your time as a director of international scouting with the Los Angeles Lakers, because I was actually really curious about this. And being that Kobe Bryant, he international born, but everyone recognizes his greatness. How much of an influence was he, I guess, in maybe, I don't know whether or not he was directly involved, but how much of an influence was he as a person who played in the NBA, but, his game kind of grew and evolved, being born from Italy? How much of that played an important role in what you wanted to do and where you wanted to see international scouting as it would help the Lakers balance themselves to be that complete franchise, that organization that has attained those 3 championships in those years that you were there? How much of that influence and how much of it was definitely a proponent? Like, you didn't have to fight for what you believed was definitely an important component to help them be a complete franchise through that time frame.
Well, first of all, that's a good question. I'm going to divide it into 2 different parts. One is the Kobe part, and one is just general international players. First of all, I'm not fighting for any international player if I don't believe the guy's better than an American player at the same position. I'm not. But with the Lakers, when I got there was absolutely no international flavor. Okay, and the league was changing. You saw teams, that had a lot of international players, and they played the game a little bit, a little more teamwork. And you saw that with the Spurs. A lot of teams were starting really to blossom with international players. I feel, when I at one point, and not all these players, were scouted by me or I made the deal or something. Absolutely not. But we went from having no international players to going to the NBA Finals with Sasha Vujacic, Roni Turiev, Vladimir Radmanovic, Pau Gasol, somebody else in there I can't remember. Kobe Bryant, if you want to, say he's international.
It's always good to sprinkle a little bit of him in there if you like. Yeah.
yeah. So we went to kind of, I wouldn't say, those were the best players for our offense, for the triangle offense. Those players, we scouted them and they were good. Now, they happen to be international. Okay, great. But I do feel that every team, if there's a little bit of a mix of, basketball IQ, just basketball style, I do think, with a couple of Europeans in their rotation, I think it definitely helps team chemistry. If we go back to Kobe instead, it's kind of, I hate when people, number one, I hate when people criticize him, but I don't think he ever got the respect he deserved for being, in my opinion, the most fundamentally sound basketball player ever, because we've never seen a player with that kind of footwork. Sure, he was a big scorer and took a lot of shots, but he was an excellent passer, excellent ball handler. His footwork was just incredible. His post game was off the charts. I mean, I don't think we're ever going to see a player. I mean, look at LeBron, and LeBron is the best player in the game. But if you compare skill sets in terms of fundamentals, it's not even close. It's not even close in terms, all these little things, mid-range game, off the dribble, 3-point shooting, all kinds of things like that. And with Kobe, we would kind of talk a little bit when I was there about, he grew up in Italy when the youth programs were outstanding. We're talking about comparable to, a Duke or North Carolina, if not better in terms of teaching, because you got kids maybe when they were 11, 12 years old and you brought them up until they reached the senior team. So probably from 11, 12 years old up till 20 years old. So you had time to build. And Kobe, grew up in an A. He was there since he was, I believe, from like 6 years old to 14 years old. And he, grew up playing where they wouldn't allow dribbling in practice. So he had to learn how to move without the ball. They played with, I think, and I went to high school in the States too, but I think especially at that time, there was more emphasis on the team game, which disciplined Kobe to some extent. Now, he was always a big scorer, of course, but he knew how to do other things also, which made him even more versatile and more, clever with and without the ball. So I think his game, although he was a great athlete and played American style, there was a foundation of great teaching and learning from a, international basketball fundamentals standpoint.
He is a phenomenal scout, been doing it since 1999. Has been a part of 3 championships with the Los Angeles Lakers organization as director of international scouting. He's the current director of global scouting for the Charlotte Hornets. And he's also a shooting expert who has just recently released his second shooting book, which is called Mastering the Art of Free Throw Shooting. Adam Filippi, we so much appreciate you hopping on board with us. And I really do hope that we are able to get you on to host the Baseline NBA Podcast Linguistics Show, where we're able to correctly break down the last names of all of the international players we just could not get right in the 2016 NBA draft.
Well, I've done a lot of traveling, and I picked up a little bit of every language, just a little bit. But hey, I appreciate you guys calling me, and it's been a pleasure being on the show. So thank you guys so much.
Thank you. You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. And this was The Breakdown. Time now for The Drop. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw of the Baseline NBA Podcast. And Shaw, first, before we get into The Drop, man, what an excellent interview with Adam Filippi. What a phenomenal guy. And you can just really tell he lives, breathes, and exudes basketball all day, every day.
No, he absolutely does. And it just, again, it's one of those times for us where we get to have an amazing guest come on, somebody who has NBA actual experience, working with players, scouting players, and just the day-to-day knowledge of, and the overall experience of, being in the league, 18, 19 years now. Again, just a humble guy, knows his stuff and continues to bring knowledge, to anybody who will listen. And I think we're very, very grateful to have had somebody like that on our show, and hope as always that the listeners enjoyed it as well.
And I think the other thing as well too, Shaw, before we get into our topics of The Drop, the one thing that I think was really important that I don't know if we would have gotten this from any other particular person, maybe except for Mr. Filippi, but to me, he really emphasizes how important that role is for scouting, and how, like, in many respects, it's kind of like the GM's consciousness talking to them about the future of the franchise, the future of the organizations, all of these 30 teams. I don't know where exactly they would be if they didn't have quality scouts and analysts looking at the talent. And they're not just limited in what you're seeing from the college basketball game. They're broadening themselves, going to places and leagues in other countries, whether it's broken down or it's of the highest, element next to the NBA. They're doing it all, and they're making the game pliable for us to enjoy, because some of these people we would never have seen, have never have heard of, if not for guys like Adam Filippi doing their thing.
I think one of the key points to that is recognizing, we've talked a lot about how, especially this year, assistant coaches have been such a phenomenon in the NBA. Like, all teams want to hire a great assistant coaches, but scouts and people within the organization like Adam Filippi have been the backbone of organizations for a very, very long time. And that's why it was so important for us to highlight, his role and kind of what he does, because he's probably one of those unheralded guys. But when you're a person that can scout a Nowitzki or Stojakovic or, guys like that and bring them over to their respective teams, a lot of that work doesn't really necessarily get heralded by the mainstream media, if you will. But owners, coaches and then obviously people within the league themselves know that how important the role of scouting are, especially those who do the global international scouting like Adam does.
All right, so now that we had our man Adam Filippi help us scout some of the younger talent that's looking to break glass and make their bones in the NBA, let us do a little bit of scouting on the free agency market that is due to happen over the next few days. And listen, let's not make any bones about it. This is not just about Kevin Durant, and it's not just about LeBron James. We basically saw a classic 7-game series in which history was made. But a lot of that history would not have happened had a guy like LeBron James reneged on going back to the Miami Heat and decided to come back home to play for the Cleveland Cavaliers. Another move that nobody was expecting to see, and this has probably been the second time that LeBron James has pulled that kind of stunt. So clearly we're not going to be looking at this situation with our eyes closed. We're going to be keeping them wide open, because as much as we believe and think that the best means for a guy like Kevin Durant, which is to come back and play for the Oklahoma City Thunder, who are one game away from finding themselves playing in the NBA Finals, it can easily just go sideways, and he can basically pull a LeBron himself. But what does that mean for the rest of the guys that are amongst the class of free agents for the 2016-2017 NBA season? Shaw, when you look at this, it is really a very, very peculiar and tantalizing feast of free agency for us to indulge in. Guys like Bradley Beal, Nicholas Batum, Mike Conley, DeMar DeRozan, Paul Gasol, Al Horford, Andre Drummond, Dwight Howard, Joakim Noah, Dirk Nowitzki, Chandler Parsons, Rajon Rondo, and Hassan Whiteside amongst the big names that we talk about. I think in order for us to really look at this for how it should be looked at, we need to break these free agent classes down into tiers specifically. The high-end ones, the middle-end ones, and the guys that could actually fly under the radar but still provide quality in what these GMs might be looking for and willing to spend to help booster or bolster their roster. Let's first talk about those tier 1 players, Shaw. All of those guys that I mentioned, who do you think stands out next to, obviously, outside of Kevin Durant and those guys, because they're on another level, but who do you think stands out and really looks to gain being a top-tier, highly touted free agent for this class?
Well, I think if anybody was looking at it from a talent standpoint, or even just one of those guys who can fit in any system, I think Al Horford probably stands out next as not say the biggest name, but is probably the best fit for multiple teams. Horford's ability to play defense, again, he's not, one of those jack of all trades, master of none type of players, but just is a good professional, great attitude, great locker room guy as well. I think he's somebody who can go anywhere and really help them out. Outside of Horford, I think for me, people who quote unquote miss on Kevin Durant can get our guy, Adam's guy, in Charlotte, and Nicholas Batum. I think he's somebody who can obviously do a lot of those things that NBA team needs. He can defend, he can score, he can pass, he can shoot the three with some relative consistency as well. He obviously needs to stay healthy. It's one of his main problems. But Batum and Horford are the two next best players I think available that realistically have a chance to go somewhere else and can really help no matter where they go.
What to me I find interesting, Shaw, is what is really now dictating the possible movements for these players. You look at a guy like Joakim Noah, you look at a guy like Paul Gasol. While both of these guys played under the Chicago Bulls, I really do believe that they have different aspirations as far as their priorities go with being successful and maximizing the dollar potential. Because a team, for example, maybe like the Golden State Warriors, would be more than willing to throw out money for him to probably play the 5 position. And if you're Paul Gasol, you look at this as a team that found themselves one game away from being back-to-back world champions. And if the Warriors are willing to throw out that money, while it seems in kind great, the priority for Paul is, I want to be a part of a team that's an actual contender, a team that is 1 game or 2 games away from putting themselves in a position to help me get that 3rd championship ring. And if you're Paul Gasol, you look at that and you say, all right, that should probably be the top of my list given my age, and this will probably be the last big time payout that I'm going to wind up getting in my career. Then someone like Joakim Noah, who's found himself always working hard to put himself in the position to to garner the respect and to garner the monies that he's earned. And he's realized that there's really only been one coach who's actually believed in him, who's believed in what he's been able to do and what he can bring to a basketball team. And if he feels most comfortable playing with that team even though it's a very young team, the upside for someone like a Joakim Noah to participate for that team could do wonders for him. Also, you could just look at the simple fact that, hey, he was injured. And so now that he could be possibly 100%, everything that made him the defensive player in the year, everything that made him one of those highly touted possible MVP kind of guys, the glue guy, leadership guys, someone's going to pay that kind of money for him as long as he feels like it's the right fit for him. Just two completely different perspectives from two guys that have gone about it in two different ways that played on the same team last year are considered big name free agents.
Yeah, I think Noah and Gasol they do have similar goals in mind. I think they both want to win, no matter whether Gasol is at the back nine of his career, as some people would like to say. I think Noah realizes that, hey, you know what? He's had some injury issues too, and he's about winning, hasn't really been in a culture in the NBA that has fostered losing. I don't think he's willing to just go to any team in particular. And I believe there was a report that came out, and even with you maybe doing a little bit of foreshadowing there, talking about young teams. Obviously, there was a report about Minnesota previously. The Celtics may have some interest as another young team that can use a defensive presence. But there was also reports that I think Washington was going to offer him, something north of near $30 million a year to try to potentially come there. But are they really that close to being a winning franchise? The Knicks are supposed to be involved with both of those guys, Noah and Gasol, because of the Derrick Rose factor now. I think those are two very interesting things. But with Noah, something was said about he's willing to potentially take less money as long as he can go to a winning situation. He feels great about the culture and environment there, and somewhere that's going to support his charity foundation, Noah's Ark. That to me was an interesting caveat to that, because he wants to make sure that the team and the city and the community will be able to help him continue the work that he does in the community in that itself. So he's not just about the money per se, and I think those are some major determining factors in where Noah's going to end up going.
You're tuned to the Baseline. Callie Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. A segment of the drop as we're discussing as going through the free agency that is potentially going to take place, and some of the guys that are available on the market, and where do they rank? How do they what will happen? Is there going to be a trickle down effect like we normally have seen in recent years, where someone like Kevin Durant or LeBron James will hold up the process from guys like DeRozan and guys like Noah and Drummond or Rondo or Whiteside? To me, Shaw, I think this is a different situation. I think that before we often say that whatever happens to LeBron James or whatever happens, to Kevin Durant or whatever happens to any big name player, that obviously any of all the teams that would love to throw money at bringing them to come play for that team, it would basically stop the process, because all of these other NBA teams are just lining up their money to try and make a play and make a push, to tout that guy to come through. But now that the cap has expanded and everyone is going to be able to partake in the feasting frenzy, now you're beginning to see that some teams are not really, they're a little more realistic in their expectations about where they want to throw their money. So if I'm someone like a Chandler Parsons, Shaw, if I'm someone like a Rajon Rondo, or even a Mike Conley, DeMar DeRozan, how do I gain or take advantage of something like this? Because now all of the teams are in play. What will you be factoring in as to say this guy really should be looked at highly amongst the many teams because of what he did over the last year or over the last recent years?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's always about team need and team fit. What do you currently have, on your roster? And then, what are you really trying to attain realistically? I think Parsons is somebody who recently said he's all ears. So he's willing to listen to and entertain all situations, which I found to be a little bit strange, because I thought for him, even though he's very, very young still, that he'd only want to go to a winning situation. It just seems like the type of player who, not saying that he's a front runner by any stretch of imagination, but he doesn't seem like someone who wants to go and have all the pressure be on him in terms of having to do all the scoring and rebounding and et cetera, et cetera. He wants to be a nice piece, a complementary piece in a winning situation. So what interest he gets is something that we'll have to monitor. I think Miami is one of those teams that are interested. Houston has also expressed some interest as well. But he does have, a palatable skill set, because he can create, he can rebound and do some of the other things. Again, another guy who has some health issues. Rondo is the more interesting one to me, because I feel like point guard and what he does is, again, he's a great facilitator. His defense has slipped in recent years, as we all know. And outside of that, he still hasn't been able to get the scoring down. His free throws has been atrocious in the last 2 seasons. So his market might not be as big, especially with Rose now going to New York, as we've already mentioned. What teams out there need a pure facilitator out there? And Rondo and even Whiteside, because of his mercurial nature, both of those guys mercurial really. Those guys seem to be. I don't know how big of a market they have, because I think there's some questions with their mentality more so than even what they can do on the basketball court.
All right, Shaw, before we move over to the tier 2 guys, let's talk about the bigs. Al Horford, Andre Drummond, Hassan Whiteside. Now, much has already been said about Hassan Whiteside, and he's even alluded to making a couple of comments already, about where he stands with regards to his perspective with reference to free agency. He's like, this ain't about loyalty. It's about being in the best situation for myself. And many people may take that as a level of arrogance. Many people may look at that and say, "Oh, this boy is going to be too much." But I kind of understand where he's coming from. A lot of this started, because he was given that chance and given that opportunity. I felt he could have tempered himself down a little bit by not coming out like that. But if you're the Miami Heat and you're basically a team that almost found yourself in a position to be playing in the Eastern Conference Finals, if Hassan Whiteside is an important piece, you go after that piece before you align yourself to saying Dwight Howard will be my fix, or or Al Horford should be my fix. If Hassan Whiteside had all of that upside that supersedes those type of guys, then you do what you can to see if he's willing to come back. But if you're the Heat, though, I mean, realistically, it's not like you don't have an option here for you to find a big to replace him if he's not willing to come back.
Yeah, you're right. Horford and Howard are the proverbial backup plans. If Whiteside decides he's going to take his talents elsewhere for whatever reason. And I think Miami would be just fine with that. They also have to re-sign Dwayne Wade, who we didn't mention, but there's not much doubt that he's going to end up returning to Miami on some sort of, Kobe-like deal, if you will. But Whiteside is their priority. And, again, I have said many things about Mr. Whiteside on this podcast and on this show over the last year or so. And, I wouldn't want to be the team that invests in that type of money in him. But nevertheless, somebody's going to do it. And Miami feels like they're going to have to if they want any chance of keeping him. But before we move on, real quick, I want to say Conley is somebody you should definitely watch out for. He may or may not leave Memphis. If he were to leave, I can only see him potentially going to the San Antonio Spurs, to kind of replace Tony Parker and put Tony Parker in a backup role, as the Spurs always try to reload and retool. And I guess we we do have to talk about the man Durant, bro, before we move on. Just real quick, if you were to leave OKC, where do you think he'd go?
If he were to leave OKC, man, this would be tough. I know people don't think that it's possible, it's conceivable. What would really stop you from not playing with Golden State? Honestly, what would really be? I mean, seriously, the Oklahoma City people are going to be, jostling you because of the fact that you decide to go play for the Golden State Warriors.
I think that with that, it's funny because there was some conversation I had recently, and it was about, well, they're one game away from beating them. So, okay, now do you go and join them and say, okay, you get them over the hump after they fell short in the NBA Finals, or is it like, hey, you were one game away from beating them, let's go back, retool. You saw what the Thunder have already done, getting Oladipo and some of those other pieces. Now do you retool and go back out there and try to take them out, at least for the next season? So Golden State's a very intriguing, I think, option for KD, as well as
I'm
the
just
Spurs
saying,
are.
if LeBron James did it, if LeBron James basically did it, right? Because at that time frame, the Cleveland Cavaliers didn't have much to worry about regarding the Boston Celtics. The Boston Celtics were already on their way down. They were going to try to retool, but I don't know if whether or not retooling clearly meant, once you were going to put yourself or align yourself with that kind of superpower, having Dwayne Wade and having Chris Bosh on the roster. I mean, you've already bested, a team like the Boston Celtics who were on the back end. Right. The only team that you really had to worry about, I think, at that time frame was the Orlando Magic. So to me, if you're Kevin Durant and the only team that really were going to be stopping you, if you're being realistic, other than the San Antonio Spurs, was going to be the Golden State Warriors, then I think it just comes down to, well, I don't want to go too far off waiting to put myself in a position to play for a championship. So I'm either going to go completely opposite of my conference, or I got to go with the two best teams. And if you saw that team in the Western Conference Finals and you're not going back to your old team, why not go to that team if they're going to make the money available for you?
I agree with that. I think it really is a 3-team race, although 6 teams are supposed to be vying for the services. Golden State, San Antonio, and obviously OKC, I think, have the best chances of OKC being number one out of those 3.
It's not as if the Golden State Warriors is the worst, or as a matter of fact, Golden State is considered one of the best organizations to go and play for at this particular point. So that's the reason why I'm saying, if all you're worried about is the perception that people think you're a title chaser, fine, whatever. I mean, but it's not the worst in the world, because if you do, Kevin Durant is still a positive figure. He's still one of the most highly endorsed basketball players, for the NBA. I just don't see where that's going to last long in the same sense as what happened to LeBron James.
And again, I think, it's two totally different situations. Durant's not born in OKC and then leaving his hometown to go chase it. It's a completely different thing. So if he were to leave, I think he'd be fine. I'm just not buying that the Clippers have a chance, not buying that the Heat or the Celtics even have a real chance, although he said he'll take meetings with those 3. Again, I think his top 3 choices have to be OKC, Golden State, and San Antonio.
Well, let me caveat this thing out, Shaw, before we quickly go on to the tier 2 players. One thing is for certain that I think people need to understand, because I think people get way too emotional at times when they hear, the Celtics are going to go after. Well, I don't understand why we're doing it. There's no realistic expectations that we're going to get this guy. But you want your team to go after that guy. There's 2 things that has to happen. Either you're going to get Kevin Durant, or you're going to put on notice that you need a player. And if there are other players that are available in this free agency, they're going to see that you are willing to spend money. And you have to be, if free agency is something that's important to you, you have to put yourself in play. You can't be one of those teams like, say, the New York Knicks over the last 3 years, who the only thing that people have been talking about is they've been handicapped with the signings that they've done over the last 5 years. You don't want to be that team. So now, while Knicks fans might be complaining, and now finally they did a deal, they did a trade that actually did them a service, not a disservice, an actual service. And we're still talking about how the Knicks have money to spend. But whether it's this year or next year or the next 2 years, at least people know that the Knicks have money to spend and they're willing to go after free agents. You just don't want to be a team where, if you're saying free agency is a priority, that you are basically sitting on the sidelines because you couldn't make enough money, couldn't make enough room for cap space to sign guys that you are totally interested in. So I think even the teams that are not even in play are going to benefit from the fact that they're even being considered by Kevin Durant.
No, I mean, they will be. And like we said, throughout the season, there's going to be 29 teams. Sorry, there'll be 30 teams interested in Durant one way or the other. So OKC obviously trying to retain his services, and then 29 other teams chasing him. I don't care who you are. If you have a way to make room for him, you will. Even the Cleveland Cavaliers, if they could feasibly make room for him and he wanted to go there, they'd find a way. Kevin Love would be out of there, and they'd make it happen. So, that's something we'll have to definitely watch, as the summer unfolds.
Definitely, man. Okay, so let's go ahead and switch over to the tier 2 guys that we think that while all of the other guys that we mentioned before, their names are going to be thrown around. Some of them may even wait up until training camp before something actually happens, albeit we doubt that seriously. But these are guys that we know should probably be mentioned just as equally high, but can definitely do some damage for a team that they're going to be playing for, if not the same team that they've been playing on. Ryan Anderson, Harrison Barnes, Kent Bazemore, Bismack Biondo, Jamal Crawford, Eric Gordon, Al Jefferson, Brandon Jennings, Evan Turner, Darren Williams, J.R. Smith, shirt off maybe, Luol Deng, and I'm forgetting the Lakers guard, shooting guard, Jordan Clarkson. There you go. All of these guys are going to be available in free agency, and while the big names that we've been talking about, the DeRozans, Durants, Drummonds, and all those, these guys, man, put them on a team, they can get you right real quick.
Yeah, I like the fact that, like, when you talk about Clarkson and Barnes, those guys are restricted. Barnes, we've had some conversation about previously on the show where, would you pay him max money? I don't think he can get a max deal currently right now. But he should definitely have some interest. Clarkson I think is a piece a lot of people would like to get. The Lakers have no reason or should have no reason to let him walk away unless somebody gives him something insane and like a super insane offer. So I think he's pretty much going to stay. But the guys that I'm looking at really who can go somewhere and be one of those pieces depending on where they go that might get a certain team over the hump, if you will, like a Ryan Anderson. And even in Eric Gordon, like I said, Eric Gordon has been much maligned, even by us, and especially by you on the show. But I think if you get Gordon on an affordable deal, if you're not having to pay Eric Gordon $14-15 million, you can pay him, $8 or $9 million or whatever the case may be. And he can really be a guy who can get you 15, 16 points a game. He can be a starter, or he could probably come off the bench, depending on the situation that he was. I think for me, in the tier 2, I think Ryan Anderson and Gordon stand out the most for me. Bazemore is somebody who's obviously increased his stock a whole lot and has improved his overall game, and is going to be able to get paid this summer. Biyombo as well. Al Jefferson, I think, a couple of years ago, you would have been considering him a tier 1 free agent, but the foot problems and his age is definitely slowing him down, so it brings him down to a tier 2. And we can even have some debate and argument about whether Brandon Jennings, Darren Williams, and those guys are even tier 2. They might be considered tier 3 by a lot of people out there in the NBA, depending on. But again, it also depends on the situation they go to, and I think they can have productive years if they end up in the right spot.
Well, listen, if you're Mark Cuban, you'll probably try to figure out a way to get Darren Williams again before you try and look at Rajon Rondo. So we don't want to relive that experience, right? So it's interesting because I think the Dallas Mavericks are going to be really a peculiar situation. I mean, forget Dirk Nowitzki. We know Dirk's more likely going to come back, but you're going to have to start building this team, and you got to start looking young. Now, I'm not saying that Darren Williams is old, but he definitely does not look like the Darren Williams that came out of the University of Illinois. His first 4 or 5 years with the Utah Jazz, right? I mean, he definitely doesn't look like that dude anymore. And I just think that you have to be realistic. Like, if you're the Mavericks, where do you start? Do you start with the Harrison Barnes, right? Throw out that money like you did when you threw it out for Chandler Parsons. I just think that Harrison Barnes, I think he just needs to be in a better place. I don't know if whether or not playing in Golden State is going to be the place for him. And I think maybe you get someone athletic next to a Dirk Nowitzki that can equal out. And then maybe on the low end, you kind of rummage around and find a quality point guard that you can put plug and play in there. Because it's going to be a rebuilding process no matter how you look at it, no matter how you slice it. So you eventually got to start getting young. Ryan Anderson, really intriguing, Shaw. I like where you're coming from with Ryan Anderson, because a lot of people are talking about how if things don't pan out with the Warriors not getting Durant, and I don't know if whether or not Al Horford would be a nice fit for them to maintain that small but still get a little bit big at the center position, a little bit more athletic in the center position. Getting a guy like Ryan Anderson who just basically stretches and shoots the damn basketball almost as far as Steph Curry shoots the basketball. He's not a bad passer. He's a quality rebounder, maybe a little lacking in the defensive side at times, but still, he's somebody that you could put on that team and he can instantly be an upgrade to that depth chart of that front court for the Warriors. Definitely sought after. I know teams don't want to see that situation happen. So it's going to be really interesting to see, who gets looked at as guys that can instantly be coming in, playing almost starter minutes, literally, and then finding themselves in a situation where they are contributing greatly, if not helping the depth of a team, helping the starting lineup for a team.
No, it's true. And again, these guys are people who can probably go either way. When I really look at them, they can really go and become starters on in the new situations, or they can be, important pieces off the bench. And we talk about a guy like Evan Turner, even he's an important piece for Boston coming off the bench, did start at certain times for them as well, too. But a lot of rumors about him potentially going to New York. Don't know if that's still the case with the acquisition of Rose and some of the other moves that they want to make, trying to go after Kevin Durant as well. But I think, Turner's a guy who could definitely come off the bench. J.R. Smith has opted out. All intentions, I'm sure, would be to go back to Cleveland, but he got his ring now, so you don't know. Maybe he doesn't, and does he go somewhere and go back into his customary six-man role and try to get that? Speaking of six-man, the six-man of the year, Jamal Crawford, is also in this tier 2 rating that we have here too. So chances are he's going to go somewhere if he leaves the Clippers, and same thing, he's going to resume his role as a productive bench scorer. So a lot of value can be had with these guys, and especially with escalating cap. Yeah, you may have to pay a little bit more than in previous years, but but I think there are some even values in these guys. And I go back to that, especially with the Eric Gordons of the world. I think Luol Deng we mentioned as well too. Does he was making $10 million a year for the Heat last year. So does he go somewhere and make around that same money? And become a productive guy, and that's two-way guy who can still hit the mid-range jumper. Obviously, a little bit longer in the tooth now than in previous seasons, but I think can be still productive. So I like this crop of guys. It's just going to be interesting to see what the market bears for them and what teams actually show some interest.
All right, Sean. Finally, let's go ahead and move on to the tier 3 guys. Now, these are guys that are clearly going to be flying underneath the radar. Interesting names that we put into that particular tier: Aaron Aflalo, who I just really think just had a really absolutely down year last year, even though coming off of the injuries that he came off of, he just really wasn't able to put it together, and clearly did not fit with the New York scheme and what they were trying to do. Cole Aldridge, interesting person, Shaw, that you make mention of, because he played the backup role brilliantly, especially with periods of Blake Griffin going down to injury, plugged in a lot of minutes behind DeAndre Jordan, who clearly was shouldering that front court for the Clippers while they were going through all of the injuries they went through last season. Mario Chalmers, we don't talk enough about how that trade from the Miami Heat to Memphis had impacted Chalmers, who was definitely taking advantage of that opportunity. When Conley went down to injury, Chalmers stepped up big time and was becoming a clutch player. Be very interesting to see if the Memphis Grizzlies might figure out a way to try and bring him back. But Chalmers definitely getting plug and play. And Jeff Green, we talk about him so up and down, so skittish, man. And we thought maybe going back to the Clippers playing underneath Doc Rivers, he would revitalize and kind of become a resurgence to be talked about as one of those quality free agent guys, whether to stay with Los Angeles or elsewhere. Roy Hibbert, absolute bust in Los Angeles. Ty Lawson, OJ Mayo, Ish Smith, Marvin Williams. Talk about resurrection playing for the Charlotte Hornets. If I were Williams, I'd figure out a way to stay in Charlotte. But man, he could definitely be a great suitor in other places. And there's one person in particular, Shaw, that if people are not paying attention to and they didn't see what he's done throughout this year playing for the Portland Trailblazers, your boy, Alan Crabb. What makes him such an attractive find, and someone that, you call him tier 3, but he could easily be snuck up into that tier 2 conversation as well, too.
Yeah, I think just from a money standpoint, what he may garner. I mean, and maybe I'm undervaluing, his agent's ability to go out there and really sell his services, because I think this is a pro's pro. Somebody who's really worked his way up, and it's not just a shooter. He's a guy who can rebound the basketball a little bit, play a little bit of defense too, and fit into pretty much into any system. And the fact that, again, he is a shooter first, that's theme of the show. Really, that's a skill that translates no matter where you go. And I really like his ability to contribute on that side of the basketball. And I think he can go anywhere and be effective immediately. So if he get him on a 2 or 3 year deal, I don't know what the market may bear for him, but I just feel like so many teams need that. And I think he'd be willing to take a 6-man role if he was going to be assured minutes. I don't know if he needs to start. Don't know exactly what he and his agent have been discussing with teams. But for me, he's definitely somebody who I'd be looking at and be trying to get if I need some shooting. And again, that always comes out to me. We talk about a team like the Memphis Grizzlies. I'm banging down on Crab's door at 12:01 on July 1st. Like, yo, what's good? How can we bring you over here to help us out a little bit? I think he'd be a perfect fit. And some other tier 3 guys, 2 more, just throwing their names out there. And one who I know you're not going to love as much, but Jan Mahimi and Festus Ezeli. Another two bigs that might be available for the low, if some teams are out there that are interested.
On the low, yeah, definitely. Well, listen, physicality, athleticism, and Mahimi, they just need to be in the right situation. And I think a lot of it, again, too, comes down to their development. Maybe they need Adam Filippi to help them out, so that they can find themselves earning, minutes, because they definitely hurt themselves throughout the course of the year when critical situations occurred that they needed to step up and help their teams. They really weren't viable in a way that I think people had expected them to be. And listen, that goes a long way, man. When you're talking about trying to put together a team that's going to be effective, that's going to be clutch. This one of the reasons why we talked about how the Golden State Warriors are just this great basketball team for the last 3 years, because the guys that they put in the situations that they've had have been effective, and they maximize the talent that they brought to the table. So we're going to see how this all plays out. But it'll be very interesting to see what gets exposed from some of these guys. Real quick, Shaw, obviously before we move on to end our show, Who do you think has best opportunity for hoops redemption in that tier 3 that we're looking at? Aaron Aflalo, Jeff Green, Roy Hibbert, Ty Lawson, OJ Mayo. Who do you think has the best opportunity for hoops redemption from this free agency?
It's definitely going to depend where they go. I think when you look at those guys who has the most left in the tank, I'd want to say Aflalo probably does, especially because he can contribute on both ends of the floor. If he goes somewhere, and especially if he goes to a 6-man role, guy who can come in and post up smaller guards, can still shoot the corner 3 pretty effectively and can still defend. Depending on his situation, I think he has the most left in the tank. I'd love to see OJ Mayo. I'd love to see Ty Lawson kind of get their careers back on track, if you will. Mayo was doing all right in Milwaukee, but just kind of fell off the last season as they just have so much other talent, superior talent, that he's not somebody that they have to rely on a regular basis. If he leaves that situation and goes somewhere else, I'd love to see him get back on track too. But for me, Aflalo probably has the most upside of the tier 3 guys, as we're calling them.
Yeah, I listen. I'm absolutely done with my boy Uncle Jeff. I love him. Again, I have all the respect in the world for him. He's a really great guy. Always does a lot for the community. Georgetown, Hoya, love the dude. But I'm beyond that now. Like, if he finds a team, I know that the team that he's going to find himself playing on he's going to be relegated to role minutes. And maybe that's good. Maybe that's good enough for him, and maybe that'll be good enough for the team that elects to throw money his way. But I agree with you, Shaw. I'd really be interested to see how OJ Mayo and Aaron Aflalo bounce back after suffering the injuries that they've suffered and really just having the disappointing seasons that they've had, because their skill sets were definitely needed during this past season. I don't know if it was absolutely needed for the teams that they played for, but it was absolutely needed in what you profile for available free agents and the style and brand of play that now is dictating in the NBA. They definitely would have been in the mix. So it would be great to see them reinsert themselves back in that conversation and basically helping a team move forward either in the playoffs or possibly to be championship contenders. What an excellent show that we've had this week, Shaw. I mean, so much that we've gone into, so much insight, and really, it's just, I'm telling you, man, it's all building up for this upcoming free agency. Really exciting things that are going down the pipeline, man. And listen, with all the names that we've been throwing out there, and there's going to be some more that's going to be coming out on very, very shortly, very soon. Trade possibilities still in the play. I mean, Shaw, man, it's just absolutely awesome how we're entering into the fold of this upcoming NBA offseason and how everything is tracking out so far.
Yeah, it's an absolutely fun time, I think, for all of us, especially, the fans as well, too. You get to see, Summer League's going to be starting pretty soon, so you're going to see these rookies in action. And then, see if some of even the rookies get traded before they go to their final destinations, if you will, to be part of some of the larger trades out there. I know sign-in trades aren't that big of a thing as they used to be a couple of seasons ago, but those are still some options, I think, for teams and some free agents who may not be happy with their situations financially and may want to try to do something else and move themselves along. Looking for the biggest movers to be, I think Horford is someone who's probably definitely leaving. Howard is obviously leaving. Gasol and Noah. Those are 4 bigs right there who are not going to go back to their respective teams more than likely. It can really shake up the landscape of the NBA. And then, from the wingman position, I'd love to see where DeRozan goes. Chances are he stays in Toronto, but if he were to leave, that definitely changes things, especially in the Eastern Conference. It's just so much movement that I think can potentially happen out there, and we got to stay locked in as it all goes down over the summer.
Definitely, man. And look, man, we could have another 2.5-hour conversation leading all things up to NBA free agency, but we'll definitely be keeping our finger on the pulse of everything happening as free agency occurs, and obviously all the news that's happening in the association. We will definitely be in the crux of it, ready to discuss it, and we want you to discuss it. That's the mantra: download and discuss. That's what we're all about here on the Baseline NBA podcast. So once again, we'd like to thank our special guest, Adam Filippi, just a remarkable individual. Once again, we also would like to encourage you, for you guys that are into the game of basketball, who are learning the game of basketball. His new book, Mastering the Art of Free Throw Shooting, is out. He also has it available, shooting video tutorials available on YouTube. So definitely go and check that out. Once again, man, what a great interview we had with Adam Filippi, and we're definitely going to be looking forward to some of the things that he'll be doing with the Charlotte Hornets moving forward. And then what an excellent show for you and yours. We appreciate everybody tuning in and listening to this week's show of the NBA Baseline. For the Baseline, Cal Lee, Warren Shaw. We appreciate you guys, and we'll catch up with you next time.